Good morning, folks, and welcome back to News 12 South Edison. My name is Alan David, and I will be your news show host tonight. For the viewers joining us at home, we're going to be discussing the 1920s and the special industrialists and innovators that shaped America's history. We were going to travel back in time to personally interview all four candidates, but that unfortunately didn't go so well. On the clip.
Ooh.
Hey, is that Henry Ford, the perfecter and mass producer of the automobile?
Oh yeah, it is. I'm gonna go interview him.
Hey, Mr. Ford! Mr. Ford! Mr. Ford! Mr. Ford!
Yes, hello. How may I be of assistance?
Oh, hey, Mr. Ford, I'm an interviewer from the future, and I'm here to congratulate you on your induction into our Hall of Fame.
What? From the future? Get away from me, you nut.
No, wait, come back. I'm from the future, I promise. This is all gonna make sense one day.
From the future, huh? You think you can punk me? I'll batter your brains out.
Ooh!
Well, as you all saw, going back in time is clearly not going to work, so I had my crew think of another solution. But unfortunately, the entire crew was from South Edison, which meant that they had the intellect of a potato. This meant that we would have to end up brainstorming ideas by ourselves, and after some serious debating, we finally figured it out. We will now be handing the next segment of our show off to our Chief Scientific Officer to explain how we interviewed our four different candidates.
Hey guys, this is your Chief Scientific Officer here. What we decided to do is to bring back the minds of our four candidates through a computer and then project them as a hologram. This makes so that we can speak to them normally and they can respond just as if they're here in person. This technology is at the top of the line right now, so we decided to take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. So instead of wasting time and boring our viewers, let's start our interviews. We will be having Mr. Henry Ford as the first interviewee. Mr. Ford, you are being interviewed by Gautam.
So, Mr. Ford, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you did.
Well, I built the Model T, the most affordable automobile of the 1920s. This mode of transportation allowed people to travel much further distances in a much smaller amount of time, depending on the distance, of course. The reason that these cars are so cheap is because of the mass production of these cars and the assembly line, which I employed in many of my factories.
Can you please elaborate on what this assembly line is and what the Model T has to do with it?
The assembly line is basically where each worker is given one simple task. They work on their simple assigned task repeatedly and no other part of the car. For example, one worker would be assigned a job putting the wheels on the cars. They would only put the wheels on the cars and complete no other part of the car. And so, each subsequent worker would complete a different component of the car. This makes the production of the cars exponentially faster. To put this in perspective, it used to take 12 hours to complete a single Model T car. Now it only takes 2.5 hours, while also creating jobs for unskilled workers.
As many of you viewers obviously know, the car was and still is one of the most essential components of an average American's lifestyle. Can you please enhance our understanding on what exactly the Model T did in both the 1920s and the years to come?
Well, that's an excellent question, Mr. Andy. You see, the Model T was not actually the first car model. The first car model was made by a man similar to myself, Carl Benz. However, the distinction between my work and his is that the product of my endeavors was exponentially cheaper and more accessible to the majority of Americans. The affordability and accessibility of the Model T both played a vital role in the adaptation of the majority of Americans from farms to cities and the transition from agricultural America to an urban America.
That is very true, Mr. Ford. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you for the interview with Mr. Ford, Gautam. And now we move on to the interview with John Dewey, conducted by one of our very own APUSH Longneck Gupta.
So, Mr. Dewey, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you did.
I am an educator and a huge advocate for education for life. I also set forth the principles for learning by doing, which meant that I believe students need to experiment and interact with their environment in order to understand the topics better. This principle was what essentially formed the foundation for progressive education. In my opinion, education is just as important as having a job is because of its importance to the advancement of the country.
How did kids and potential workers in the 1920s having a better education then change the future now?
A good example is the many scientific advances that were made from 1900s to the 1920s. The Rockefeller Foundation launched a public health program in 1909, which eventually cured hookworm by the 1920s. An even crazier and life-changing advancement was when the life expectancy of a newborn baby increased from 50 years in 1900 to 59 years in 1929.
That's a very good point. Even in today's society, education is a major part of life because it builds the basis for which you build your career on. Your ideas are still important and prevalent in today's society. Thank you for the information, Mr. Dewey.
Thank you for having me. I also wanted to mention that progressive education and science was not welcomed into America because of the fundamentalists who believed that the discoveries regarding Darwin's theory of evolution went against the teachings of God and the Bible.
You're absolutely right. The progressive ideas of the time were not widely accepted and were often brought down by fundamentalists. Fortunately, though, through time, the idea became more and more accepted to the point where they're assimilated into modern-day thinking. Once again, I want to thank you, Mr. Dewey, for sitting with us through this interview. And back to the studio with Alan David.
Thank you for that interview. Now, folks, we're going to move on to the pair of brothers who changed the idea of aviation forever. Please welcome into the studio for the first time, Orville and Wilbur Wright.
So, Wright brothers, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you guys did.
Well, we invented, built, and flew the first successful airplane.
December 17th of 1903 will always be historic. Good times. It was the first successful flight when Orville here flew a plane 120 feet for 12 seconds. Thus began the era of aviation when flying started being used for various things from stunt flyers and airmail to lethal weapons during World War I.
Weren't you scared to be flying an airborne vehicle for the first time in the history of the world?
What? No. Well, maybe a little bit. It was only scary because there were no safety precautions and there was a high chance that you would not survive the flight. However, airplanes were much safer by the 1930s to the 1940s and were much, much safer than automobiles at the time.
Very interesting. It's cool to see how the history behind the airplane, since it's such a standard part of our lives today in 2019. If anyone wanted to, they can go on a plane to literally anywhere in the world with few restrictions. Back to you, Alan.
Orville and Wilbur, I want to personally thank you for the interview as well as for your invention. If the airplane wasn't invented, I would never have been able to go to the Area 51 raid. Now we have Alexander Fleming in the studio with us. If you have ever been sick before, you have to thank this man for your recovery. Back to you, Gotham.
So, Mr. Fleming, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you did.
Well, to sum up, I changed the history of medicine forever when I created the first antibiotic.
Wow. Well, tell us how you did it.
Well, if I'm being honest, I discovered penicillin by accident. It all started when I began working on a culture plate of Staphylococcus aureus. This plate of Staphylococcus aureus became contaminated by a mold named Penicillium notatum. I observed that this mold would not allow the bacteria from the Staphylococcus aureus to grow. After further investigation, I realized that I had created something with the potential of helping millions, if not billions of people. This proved to be true when penicillin saved millions of soldiers' lives during World War II. Sorry for the change in scenery, guys, but we got evicted from our studio. I do not pay the bills. I live in my mom's basement. Times are hard. Thank you for sticking with us.
Even though penicillin was discovered in 1928 by none other than himself, Mr. Fleming, it is still a vital part of medicine today that the world will never forget. It was revolutionary and is still helpful to millions and millions of people around the world in 2019, and it's all thanks to you and your accidental discovery.
Thank you for that interview, Mr. Fleming, and thank you, Gautam, for conducting the interview beautifully. Now, to our viewers, to sum up this program, we had the 4 candidates to make the Hall of Fame who cultured the 1920s and shaped America's history. They were Henry Ford, with the induction, perfection, and mass production of the automobile, the Wright brothers, who changed the history of aviation forever, John Dewey, and Alexander Fleming. All 4 of these people were important in America's history, and without them, the world would not be the same. Thank you for watching this program and broadcast of Neutral South Edison. Be sure to check out our finished Hall of Fame in South Edison. I would give you the address, but most of you are from South Edison, so you probably won't know how to put it in Google Maps anyways. Thank you and have a good night.
Audio Jungle.